Welcome friends, welcome back to the kitchen, welcome back to Sunday Morning and the Old Cookbook Show. Now a couple of weeks ago we did a recipe out of this book, Aunt Sammy's Radio Recipes Revised. We did a green tomato pie, so if you want to check that one out, I'll link to it below. And we also learned that Aunt Sammy was the wife of Uncle Sam, and Uncle Sam is a fictional character, the ultra-American patriot. And so the United States is right behind me here. Right behind me is Lake Ontario, and on the other side of that lake is the United States. And I understand they're having an election this week. So in a patriotic salute to our American friends, we're going to do Aunt Sammy's election cake. Now, this is a pretty interesting cake because it is a yeast risen cake. And we need to start out by making a yeast sponge. So in this bowl, I'm going to put flour, sugar, and I'm using instant dried yeast today. It tells me to use half of a yeast cake. In 2020, where I live, fresh yeast isn't readily available. There are specialty stores where you can go and ask for it. And I could have just gone down to the brewery in the basement and got some fresh yeast that we use for brewing, because a lot of recipes in this time period tell you just to use brewing yeast. Go to the brewery, get some yeast, bring it home, and put it in with your flour. So if you live somewhere with fresh yeast and can get fresh yeast easily, go ahead and use it. Otherwise, feel free just to use the dried yeast. Now I've added some warm water, and we're just going to stir this together to make a bit of a slurry. Now that I've got this mixed together, I'm just going to set it aside and let that yeast start to work and create the sponge that we're looking for. And we're just trying to give the yeast a bit of a head start before we add the rest of the ingredients, which sometimes can be very important in a cake where you're adding a lot of sugar. Because as much as yeast eats sugar, too much sugar will kill yeast. So you need to nurture it back to life and build up a bit of a colony before you add the rest of the ingredients. So I'll see you back here in an hour. Okay, the sponge is coming along really nicely. So I'm going to move on to the rest of the recipe. And in this stand mixer, I'm going to cream together butter and brown sugar. And yes, this is 1931. This is the height of the Depression, and I am using a stand mixer. These were introduced in 1919. And I'm going to say that Aunt Sammy is fairly well off, and she would have bought one of these in the early 1920s as soon as they became available. This is creaming together nicely, so I'm going to add in an egg next. And we'll beat that egg into the butter and sugar mixture. And while that's coming together, we'll mix up the dry ingredients. So I have flour. I'm going to add to that salt, cloves, cinnamon, and grate in some nutmeg. Okay, now it looks like it's time to mix in the milk. So I'll turn the mixer down a little bit and we'll drizzle the milk in just slowly enough that I don't splash it everywhere. Okay, we'll let that mix together. And I'll just stir together the dry ingredients, get everything mixed together. Now the next step is just to combine everything together. So I'll turn this off. So I'm going to start with the sponge, and we'll get the sponge in and mix it in first. I don't know if there's any particular order that I should be doing this in. This just kind of makes sense to me. So we'll stir that in. Now that I've got that mixed in, I'm going to mix in the flour, and I'll probably do it in 3 additions just to make it a little easier for myself. Now there's dried fruit in this, and that's in the form of chopped raisins and some chopped dates. So mix those in. Now it tells me to put this mixture into a well-greased tube pan. What I've got is a bundt pan, and I have buttered this really, really well. So I'm going to put this mixture in here. It then tells me to leave this in a warm place for 3 or 4 hours to rise, just like you would bread dough. And that's a fairly slow rise, and I'm not sure whether it could be a bunch of different things. So I know that the amount of sugar and butter and dairy in here would definitely slow down the rise. Those are things that cause yeast to divide much more slowly. It could also be that the type of yeast that they were using at this time period may not have been as strong. Could have been brewer's yeast. There could have been a whole bunch of reasons for this really long, slow rise. So I'm going to be interested to see how long it actually takes. I'm kind of expecting that within 2 hours, this will be ready to go into the oven. But we'll soon find out, won't we? So I'll see you back here when it's time to go to the oven.
Hey,
Jules.
Glen. Hey, friends. Cake.
Election cake.
Election cake.
For our friends behind us across the lake over there.
Did you have an election? I guess you should have cake. Did you make this up yourself? Election
No,
cake?
so
clearly not.
So this is from Aunt Sammy.
Very
patriotic
cake.
wife of Uncle Sam. So the idea of the election cake comes out of something called a muster cake, which is pre-United States.
You muster people
You
together
mustered people
to do
together.
something for some political reason. Okay.
So, and then the first election cake, or first recipe that's called election cake, appears in the 1790s. Essentially the same recipe as this, leavened with yeast.
Ungraceful. Ungraceful, sorry.
That's quite nice. So leavened with yeast, but filled with fruit. And very boozy. It either had whiskey or brandy in it.
Hold on. This is not boozy.
No.
It is not boozy.
So this is from 1931. This is Depression era, which counts for the lack of fruit. Because, you know, everything's pared down.
Well, there's no booze.
And it's Prohibition, so there's no booze. So right off the bat, I think this is a great flavored cake, and I would revert to a pre-Prohibition.
Throw in more fruit?
And throw in more fruit.
More booze?
Yeah, I would go back before 1920 and get an election cake recipe, and because the flavor.
The flavor's good, and the yeast actually adds it. It's very light. It's a very light cake. So generally, I think we approve of our election cake, but it would be improved with booze. Now, would you eat it before you go to vote? Because that doesn't seem right.
Well, in both Canada and the United States, prior to World War I, drinking on election day was something that was, you know, not only wanted and needed, it was promoted.
Which is completely opposite to the bars can't open because we have to vote first.
You needed to get people to come to the polls, and you needed to entice them to come and vote. And one of the things that enticed them to come and vote was beer and whiskey.
Well, yeah.
And so this would be served to get people to come to town to vote, and a big celebration, and also served after voting. And that's all changed over time, and now voting is much more, I don't know.
Well, but also, I mean, you're not mustering people together to get together to vote because, you know, you just kind of vote down the street.
Yeah, it's
or
everywhere.
Vote by mail or.
So, Aunt Sammy's election cake. I think if you went to a pre-Prohibition version, this would be a winner. Thanks for stopping by. See you again soon.